The door is oak, white oak, split and planed by Woodson the autumn before we married, hung on iron hinges he forged himself at the Fitch place where Harlan had a small smithy. The latch is leather, a loop and peg arrangement that Woodson preferred to iron latches because leather was quieter and he was a man who did not like unnecessary noise. The door has been on this house for 61 years. It has swelled in summer and shrunk in winter, and been rained on and snowed on and baked by the August sun that comes over the ridge and hits this side of the house full in the afternoon. The wood has grayed. The hinges have developed a sound, not a squeal, but a low groan, metal that has been bearing weight for 6 decades and is tired of it. The leather latch has been replaced twice because leather does not last the way iron and oak last, but the door itself is the same door, same planks, same hinges, same frame. It is the last thing my husband touched in this house. He put his hand on it, right side, about chest height, where the wood is slightly darker from the oil of hands over years, and he pulled it closed behind him. That was the morning of April the 8th, 1879. That was a Tuesday. He was going to check his traps along War Eagle Creek, same as he did every 3rd or 4th day, same as he had done for all the years of our marriage. He had his rifle on his shoulder and his canvas sack for the pelts, and he had finished his coffee, and he said, "See you this evening, Lutie." The same words in the same order he always said them. "See you this evening." Then the door. Then his boots on the path that goes down from the house to the creek bottom. Then nothing. He did not come back that evening. He did not come back the next morning. He has not come back in 48 years. I'm 81 years old, and my husband walked through that door when I was 33, and I have been on this side of it ever since, and he has been on the other side, wherever the other side is, whether it is the bottom of a sinkhole or a town in Missouri or a grave nobody marked or a life nobody knows about. He has been on the other side, and the door is not opened from the outside since the 8th of April, 1879. My name is Lutie Pearl Scoggins, born Lutie Pearl Vestal, on the 3rd of March, 1846, in Benton County, Arkansas, on the Ozark Plateau, which is a way of saying the rocky wooded hills of northwestern Arkansas, where the soil is thin and the timber is thick, and the creeks run clear over limestone, and a person can walk for a day in any direction without crossing a road if they know where they are going, and sometimes even if they do not. I should tell you about this place because the place is part of what happened, or part of what might have happened, since I do not know what happened. And after 48 years of considering the question, I have assembled a collection of possibilities but no certainties, and I will share the possibilities with you because they are all I have. Benton County sits on the Ozark Plateau in the far northwest corner of Arkansas. The land is not flat. It is not the kind of hills that roll gently like the ones I am told exist in Virginia or Kentucky. These are hard hills, steep, rocky. The limestone breaks through the surface everywhere, gray shelves and ledges jutting from the red clay, and the trees grow up between the rocks with a stubbornness that matches the people who settled among them. Oak and hickory mostly, with cedar in the dry places and sycamore along the creeks. The creeks are everywhere. They cut through the hills in narrow valleys, some barely wide enough for a wagon road, and they run over gravel beds and between bluffs and through stretches of bottomland where the soil is better and where the farms are, because you do not farm a hilltop in the Ozarks unless you have no other option, and even then you think twice. The people who settled here were Scots-Irish mostly, families that had moved south from Virginia and the Carolinas, and then west through Tennessee and Missouri, looking for land that nobody else wanted, which is what the Ozarks were. Land nobody else wanted. Too rocky for big farming, too remote for commerce, too far from the rivers that mattered, the Mississippi, the Arkansas, to be useful for shipping. But the land was cheap, and it was free of the people and institutions that the Scots-Irish had spent generations avoiding, which is to say it was free of government and church hierarchy and anyone who presumed to tell them how to live. The Ozarks attracted people who wanted to be left alone, and for the most part the world obliged. My father was Buford Vestal. He farmed 80 acres on a hillside north of War Eagle Creek, corn, hogs, a small tobacco patch, a kitchen garden that my mother tended with the fierce attention of a woman who understood that the garden was the difference between eating adequately and eating insufficiently. We were poor by any standard that measures poverty in dollars, but we did not consider ourselves poor because everyone around us lived the same way, and poverty that is universal is not experienced as poverty but as normalcy. We ate, we were sheltered, we were clothed, though the clothes were mended and the mending was mended and the patches had patches. We survived, which in the Ozarks was the relevant measure. The war came to Benton County in a way it did not come to most places. We were divided, not along the clean lines that history books prefer, North and South, Union and Confederacy. We were divided household by household, family by family, brother against brother in the literal sense. My father fought for the Union, enlisted in the 1st Arkansas Federal Cavalry in 1862. Woodson's father, Micah Scoggins, sympathized with the Confederacy, though he did not formally enlist. The war in Benton County was not fought by armies in formation. It was fought by bushwhackers, guerrillas, small bands of armed men who burned farms and stole livestock and killed their neighbors over loyalties that had been chosen or inherited or assigned by geography. Benton County was burned twice during the war, fences torn down, cattle driven off, houses put to the torch. The Battle of Pea Ridge in 1862 was fought not 15 miles from our farm, and the sound of the artillery carried across the hills like thunder that would not stop. My father came home in 1865 alive but altered. He did not speak about what he had seen, and I did not ask, because you did not ask men in the Ozarks about the war. The asking would have required them to answer, and the answering would have required them to remember, and the remembering was the thing they were trying not to do. He farmed, he managed, he died in 1874 of something the physician called a congestion of the lungs, which might have been pneumonia or might have been anything, because physicians in Benton County in 1874 named things they could not cure, and the naming was the extent of their service. I married Woodson Scoggins in October of 1866. I was 20. He was 22. The marriage bridged the division that the war had created between the Vestal and Scoggins families, which some in the county considered an act of reconciliation, and others considered an act of betrayal, depending on which side of the division they had occupied. I did not marry Woodson for reconciliation. I married him because he was steady, and because his hands were competent, and because when he looked at me I could see that the looking was genuine, that he was seeing me specifically rather than seeing a woman generally, and this specificity of attention was the thing I valued most, because in the Ozarks, where people were spare with words and spare with feeling, being looked at specifically was the closest thing to being told you mattered. Woodson was quiet. I have said this already, and I will say it again because his quietness is central to every theory I have constructed about his disappearance. He was not a man who announced himself. He entered rooms without being heard. He completed tasks without describing them. He could spend an entire day working beside me, clearing brush or mending fence or splitting wood, and exchange perhaps a dozen words, none of them unnecessary, all of them pertinent. He was not unfriendly. He was not cold. He simply did not generate language unless language was required, and most of the work of an Ozark farm did not require language. It required hands and backs and endurance, and Woodson had all three in quantity. He ran a trap line along War Eagle Creek, muskrat mostly, some raccoon, occasional beaver, though the beaver were getting scarce by the 1870s. He checked the traps every 3 or 4 days, walking the creek from the bluff above our farm south to the place where War Eagle meets the White River, a distance of perhaps 6 miles. He sold the pelts in Bentonville, which was 11 miles east and which was the closest thing to a town that Benton County possessed. The trapping supplemented what the farm produced, which was not enough on its own, and the pelts brought in the cash money that we needed for the things we could not grow or make, which were few but essential: salt, coffee, iron, ammunition. The morning of April the 8th, 1879. I have reconstructed this morning so many times that the reconstruction has become more real than the original, which I barely noticed at the time because there was nothing to notice. It was a morning. It was ordinary. He woke at his usual time, which was before dawn, and I heard him dressing in the dark, the sounds I had been hearing for 13 years of marriage, the rustle of cloth, the creak of the bed frame, the soft thud of boots being pulled on. He went to the kitchen. I heard him build up the fire in the stove. I rose and dressed and came to the kitchen, and he was there, drinking coffee, and I made breakfast, which was cornbread, and the last of the sorghum, and a piece of salt pork fried in the skillet. We ate. The children were not yet awake. Calvin was 11. Della was 9. Woodson Jr. was 6. I was 5 months pregnant with Alma, though we had not yet chosen a name. He finished his coffee. He took his rifle from the pegs above the door. He picked up the canvas sack. He said, "See you this evening, Lutie." He pulled the door closed behind him. I heard his boots on the path. I washed the dishes. I did not watch him go because I had no reason to watch him go, because he had gone 1,000 times before and come back 1,000 times before, and the 1,001st time was supposed to be the same. Before we continue, a quick word. I've released 14 full recordings that will never be on YouTube. These are the voices too personal, too raw to share publicly, completely unedited, nothing cut. If you want access, the link is in the description. It's called The Lost Recordings, and getting it helps us keep making these videos. All right, back to the story. He did not come home that evening. I fed the children. I put them to bed. I sat at the kitchen table and I waited. This was not alarm. This was patience. Men stayed out on the trap line sometimes. Weather changed. A good stretch of trapping might keep him out overnight. I went to bed. I expected him in the morning. He did not come in the morning. By midday I sent Calvin to the Fitch place. Harlan Fitch came that afternoon, and he and Calvin walked the trap line from our bluff to the White River. The traps were in their usual places. Some had been sprung, some had not been checked. No pelts had been collected, which meant Woodson had not completed his circuit. Harlan found no sign of him, no blood, no disturbed ground, no torn clothing, no rifle, no canvas sack, no Woodson. The search lasted 2 weeks. Every able man in the surrounding farms walked the hills. They checked the creek bottoms, the ridge lines, the abandoned homesteads left from the war, the old lead mine shafts that dotted the county, dark holes in the hillside that went down into the limestone and that could swallow a man and never show it. They checked the sinkholes, which were common in the Ozark karst, places where the limestone had dissolved underground and the surface had collapsed into chambers that could be 10 feet deep or 100, some filled with water, some dry, some connected to cave systems that extended miles beneath the plateau. A man who fell into a sinkhole in the woods, particularly a sinkhole concealed by brush and leaf litter, might never be found. They found nothing. The sheriff in Bentonville, a man named Pryor, came out and took a report. Missing person. Woodson Scoggins, age 35, farmer and trapper, Benton County. Last seen the morning of April 8, 1879. The report was filed. The search was ended, and I was left in the house with 3 children and a baby coming and a door that would not open from the outside. I have spent 48 years constructing explanations. I am going to tell you each one because they are what I have instead of answers, and I want someone other than myself to carry them for a while. Theory the first. He died in the woods. An accident. A fall. A sinkhole. A snake bite, though April is early for snakes in the Ozarks. A heart attack, though he was 35 and in good health. A tree fall, a rock slide, any of the 100 things that can kill a man in rough country without warning and without witnesses. This is a theory most people adopted because it was the simplest and because it did not require anyone to think uncomfortable thoughts about Woodson's character or about my marriage. He died, somewhere, in the woods. His body is in a sinkhole or a cave or buried under a rockfall in the Ozarks, which have kept secrets since before there were people to keep secrets from, are keeping this one too. I have almost believed this theory many times. It is the kindest theory. It requires no malice, no intention, no failure on anyone's part. Just bad luck. The woods took him. But 48 years have passed and no one has found a bone, not a boot, not a rifle barrel, not a button from his shirt. The Ozarks are not so vast that a man's remains could stay hidden for half a century. Hunters walk those woods. Children play in those creeks. The sinkholes have been explored by men with ropes and lanterns. Nothing in 48 years. A body leaves evidence. Even a body at the bottom of a sinkhole leaves evidence eventually. The absence of evidence does not prove the theory wrong, but it does not permit me to rest inside it either. Theory the second. He left. Deliberately. Walked away from his life, his wife, his children, his 80 acres of Ozark hillside, and started over somewhere else, west probably. The territory was still open in 1879. A man could walk to Indian Territory, which began not 30 miles from our farm, and disappear into it, could change his name, could become someone else, could leave Woodson Scoggins on the bank of War Eagle Creek like a snakeskin shed in April, and walk away as a new man with no wife and no children and no farm and no responsibilities and no past. Men did this. I know they did because I knew of 2 in Benton County alone who had done it, men who were there one season and gone the next, and whose wives were left to manage as best they could, which in the Ozarks meant managing alone because the community helped for a while and then the community had its own problems and the helping faded and you were on your own. Men left, it happened. But Woodson planted apple trees. This is the thing I return to when this theory presses hardest against my chest. In the fall of 1878, 6 months before he disappeared, Woodson planted 6 apple trees in the flat ground below the house. He dug the holes himself. He carried the saplings from a man in Bentonville who propagated them. He planted them in a row, spaced correctly, mulched them against the winter, protected them with wire cages against the rabbits. Apple trees take 5 years to bear, sometimes longer. A man who plants apple trees is making a promise to the future. He is saying, I will be here when these trees fruit. I will eat these apples. My children will eat these apples. A man who is planning to leave does not plant apple trees. He plants nothing. He loosens his grip. He prepares for departure by doing less, investing less, caring less. Woodson planted apple trees 6 months before he vanished, and I cannot reconcile the planting with the leaving, and I have tried for 48 years. But I cannot disprove it. That is the nature of this particular torment. I cannot prove he left, and I cannot prove he did not. The apple trees argue that he intended to stay. His absence argues that he did not. And between the 2 arguments there is a space that I have lived inside for 48 years that is neither marriage nor widowhood, neither abandonment nor loss, just a permanent suspension in which every morning contains the possibility that the door will open and every evening confirms that it did not. Theory the third, someone killed him. The Ozarks in 1879 were not far removed from the war, 14 years. That is not a long time when the grudge is deep enough. Woodson's father had been Confederate in sympathy. My father had been Union. There were men in the hollows who remembered the burnings and the killings and who kept ledgers in their minds of debts unpaid. Scores were settled in the Ozarks for decades after the war. a man shot in the woods, a barn burned, a fence poisoned, which meant your cattle eating something that killed them, slow and unprovable. Violence in the Ozarks did not announce itself. It moved quietly, like the men who committed it, through the trees and the hollows and the dark places where the law did not go, because the law did not have enough men or enough will to go there. Harlan Fitch told me, months after the search ended, that there were men in the county he suspected. He would not name them, said naming them without proof would start something that would not end well. I pressed him. He said, "Lutie, there are things in this county that are better left in the ground, and I believe your husband may be among them." He meant it as a kindness, a closing, an answer I could live with even if it was not a complete answer. But I could not live with it because it was not complete, and because Harlan's belief was not evidence, and because the ground he was referring to, the Ozark ground, had not produced a body or a confession or anything that would convert belief into knowledge. Theory the fourth. His mind broke. Something snapped inside him on that April morning, some cord that had been fraying for years without anyone noticing, and he walked away not with intention but with confusion, the way animals sometimes walk, following instinct rather than thought, moving without destination, ending up wherever the walking took him. This happened to men. The war had left men damaged in ways that did not show for years and then showed all at once. But Woodson had not been in the war. He had been 18 when it ended, old enough to have served, but young enough to have avoided it, and he had avoided it by staying on the farm and tending the livestock and waiting for the fighting to stop. He had not been damaged by combat. He had been damaged, perhaps, by growing up in a place where combat was happening around him, where neighbors were killing neighbors and farms were burning and the world was demonstrating its capacity for sudden violent rearrangement. But his mind, as I observed it daily for 13 years, was sound. He remembered things. He planned things. He planted apple trees. Theory the fifth. There was a woman, somewhere, someone he had met at the Bentonville market, or on one of the rare trips he made to Fayetteville, which was 30 miles south, and which he visited perhaps twice a year for supplies that could not be obtained in Bentonville. A woman who offered him something I did not offer, though I've spent 48 years trying to identify what that something might be, and I cannot find it because I provided everything I knew how to provide, which was a clean house and good food and children and a body beside his in the dark and the steady, uncomplaining partnership of an Ozark wife, which is not a romantic thing but is a durable thing, and I believed it was sufficient. This is the theory I hate. I examine it most thoroughly because it is the one I need most to disprove, and because the more thoroughly I examine it, the more I realize I cannot disprove it. I can only argue against it, and argument is not the same as certainty. When would he have met her? I do not know. Where would she live? I do not know. How would he have maintained the deception? I do not know. Woodson was not a deceptive man, or I did not believe he was, but what I believed about Woodson and what was true about Woodson are categories I can no longer assume are identical, because a man I believed would come home for dinner on a Tuesday evening in April did not come home and has not come home, and the distance between my belief and the fact is 48 years wide. I will tell you what it is like to live without an answer. I will try. It is not grief. I have known grief. My father died, and I grieved him, and the grief had a shape, a beginning, and a progression, and eventually a settling. You grieve, and the grief changes, and you accommodate it, and it becomes part of you, and you carry it, but it does not carry you. That is grief. What I have is not that. It is not anger. I have known anger. When the creditors came after Woodson was declared dead and tried to claim the farm for debts I did not know existed, I was angry, and the anger was useful because it produced action, which was a visit to the courthouse and a reading of the relevant statutes and a successful challenge to the claim. Anger has a direction. It points at something. What I have points at nothing because I do not know what to point it at. What I have is a permanent state of not knowing that has occupied the center of my life for 48 years the way a stump occupies the center of a field. You plow around it, you plant around it, you harvest around it. You cannot remove it because the roots go deeper than your tools can reach. The stump is there and you accommodate it and your field is productive and your life is livable. But the stump is always there, and you cannot pretend it is not, and every pass of the plow requires you to deviate around it, and the deviation is a reminder, and the reminder is a question, and the question has no answer. I ran the farm. I need to say this because some accounts of a woman left alone would dwell on the difficulty and the pathos, and I do not want pathos. I want the record to show that Lutie Pearl Scoggins, upon the disappearance of her husband, did not collapse or weep or seek rescue. She ran the farm. She planted the corn and the garden, and she tended the hogs, and she raised 4 children, the last of whom she was carrying when Woodson disappeared, and whom she delivered in September of 1879 with the help of a neighbor woman and no physician, because there was no money for a physician and no time for difficulty. The baby was a girl. I named her Alma, which means soul, because the child was born into an absence and I wanted her name to mean something present. Calvin helped. He was 11 when his father disappeared, and he became by necessity a working partner on the farm, doing the labor of a man before he was physically capable of it, growing into the work the way a tree grows into a space that has been cleared for it. He did not complain. He was his father's son in that respect, quiet, competent, sparing with words. He checked the traps after Woodson disappeared, took over the trap line, walked the same creek his father had walked, and came home every evening, and I listened for his footsteps the way I had listened for his father's. And the footsteps were lighter, a boy's footsteps, not a man's. And they were not the footsteps I was listening for, but they were footsteps, and they came through the door, and that was enough. The apple trees bore fruit in 1883, 4 years after Woodson planted them. The first crop was small, as first crops are, but the apples were good, tart, and firm, suitable for eating and for cider and for the apple butter I put up in jars every fall. I stood under those trees with apples in my hands, and I thought, he planted these. His hands put these trees in this ground. Whatever happened to the rest of him, his hands are in these apples. The trees are still here. They are old now, gnarled, not as productive as they once were, but they bear fruit every September, and every September I pick the apples, and I put up the butter, and I do not know if I am harvesting a promise kept or a promise broken, and the not knowing is in the apples the way it is in everything. Alma asked me once, when she was 12 or 13, what her father was like. The other children had memories, thin ones, fragments, Calvin the most, Della some, Woodson Jr. almost none, because he was 6 when it happened, and 6-year-old memories are unreliable. But Alma had nothing. She had never seen him. She had been inside me when he left and outside me when the leaving became permanent, and she had no image of him, no memory, no sensory trace. She asked me, and I told her what I could. He was quiet. He was competent. He had good hands. He planted the apple trees. He said, "See you this evening." That is what I had. Facts without explanations, details without conclusions, the man without the meaning. I petitioned the court in 1886 to have Woodson declared dead, 7 years. Arkansas law required 7 years of absence before a declaration could be made. The judge in Bentonville, a man I did not know, asked me routine questions. When was he last seen? Had I received any communication? Had anyone reported seeing him elsewhere? I answered no to everything. He signed the paper. Woodson Scoggins was legally dead as of the 10th of June, 1886. I walked out of the courthouse with a piece of paper that said my husband was dead, and I put it in the drawer with the marriage certificate, and the 2 documents sat together in the dark, and one said he was mine and the other said he was gone, and both were signed by judges, and neither one told me what happened on the 8th of April, 1879. I did not remarry. Men offered. Not many, but some. I was a woman with a farm and 4 children and a legal status that permitted marriage, and in Benton County these were sufficient qualifications. But I could not marry a man while the door remained a question. Could not legally. Could not inside myself. The stump was in the field, and I could not pretend it was not there, and bringing another man into the house would have required me to walk past that door with him, and the door would have asked me a question I could not answer, which is, "Are you certain the man who walked through me is not coming back?" I was not certain. I am not certain now. Certainty is a luxury for people whose husbands died in their beds or on battlefields or in any of the locations where death is confirmed by witnesses and by bodies. My husband did not die in a confirmed location. He did not die in any location I can identify. He may not have died at all, and until I know, which I will not know because I am 81 and the knowing has not come in 48 years and will not come in whatever years remain, I will live in this house with this door, and I will not bring another man through it. I am 81 years old. Calvin runs the farm. Della married and lives in Fayetteville. Woodson Jr. went to Oklahoma, which used to be Indian Territory, and works in the oil fields. Alma is in Bentonville, married to a shopkeeper with 2 children who call me Granny, and who know only that their grandfather disappeared a long time ago, which is the version of the story that is suitable for children because the fuller version is not suitable for anyone. I touch the door every evening. I place my hand on the oak plank, right side, chest height, where the wood is darker. I do not know why I do this. I am not sentimental. I do not believe his hand left something on the wood that my hand can find. Wood does not hold the impression of the hands that touch it, no matter how many times you touch it or how much you want it to. But I touch it anyway, every evening, the way you touch a wall in the dark to know where you are. The door tells me where I am. I am here, in this house, on this side, where I have been for 48 years, and he is on the other side, wherever the other side is. I have lived 48 years in the space between went and came back. He went, he did not come back. That is the whole of what I know. Everything else is theory, and theory is just a word for not knowing dressed up in its Sunday clothes. I do not know where my husband is. I do not know if he is. And the door is oak, and the hinges are iron, and it has not opened from the outside since the 8th of April, 1879. And I am 81 years old, and I have stopped expecting it to open, but I have not stopped listening for it. I do not think I can stop listening. Some part of me will listen for that latch until the listening stops, and when it stops, it will not be because the door opened. It will be because I could not hear any more.